Good evening, I'm Kathy Kennedy. I'm the Senior Manager of Outreach with the Peconic Land Trust, and I welcome you to our ongoing series of Zoom presentations. Hope that you're doing well and that you're enjoying the beautiful spring warm-up that we had and are having. From all of us at the Trust, we wish you well and are grateful that you're choosing to spend some time with us tonight. On a housekeeping note, you are all muted and you can post questions in the Q&A, which is the button at the bottom of your screen. So we'll try to get to some of those questions at the end of the program. Tonight's program is with local winemakers as part of our Long Island Grown series that includes conversations with local farmers, chefs, and producers of specialty items. Other Zoom programs that we've offered over the past year include a look at food insecurity on the East End and how we've partnered with local food pantries, creating and managing a living shoreline, the importance of growing native plants in the landscape for wildlife, local artists' connection to nature, and lots more. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce you to three winemakers who share many years growing grapes, creating wine, and managing the challenges that come with farming on Long Island. To be a successful winemaker really does require you to take the long view. So that's what our conversation will be focused on. Thank you for tuning in, and special thanks to our three panelists and our moderator. So a little bit about the Peconic Land Trust before we get started. As you may know, the Trust was founded in 1983 with a mission to conserve Long Island's working farms, natural lands, and heritage. And with your help, as well as the support of thousands of individuals, partner organizations, foundations, community groups, and all levels of government, we've conserved over 13,000 acres of Long Island's lands, including thousands of acres of natural lands like wetlands, shorelines, meadows, and woodlands that provide places to explore nature and also protect our water for drinking, fishing, aquaculture, and recreation. Your support has also enabled us to conserve over 6,000 acres of farmland that is available to farmers growing food, and of course, many other agricultural products. We've supported farmers' efforts to provide local food to our communities through affordable access to land, administering grants and programs that help them grow, and offering educational programs to help them maintain their high standards. All of this and more we're able to do because of supporters like you. Thank you. For today's panel, we're pleased to have Marin Brennan of Bedell Cellars and Quarry Creek Wines, John Leo of Clovis Point Wines, OnaBay Vineyards and Leo Family Wines, and Juan Micieli-Martinez of Montauk Daisy Wines. Our moderator for tonight's program is Laura Donnelly. Laura is a local food writer and pastry chef who has lived on the East End for more than 25 years. She knows good food, good wine, and how to pair them with success. Laura has been a recipe contributor and occasional guest on the Barefoot Contessa, worked as a personal chef, and has moderated our Long Island Grown lecture series for at least 8 years. Before I turn the program over to Laura and our panelists, just a final reminder on the Q&A. Just use the button at the bottom of the screen to pose your questions, and we'll try to get to those as many as we can at the end of the program. And with that, I turn it over to Laura Donnelly with our sincere thanks. Laura?
Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you to the panelists for joining us. I know it's a busy time of year, and thank you, Kathy, for that nice introduction. I apologize for my landline ringing. So you already heard who is joining us today. It's a little unusual. Sometimes when we have these panels, we might have a bayman and a baker and maybe somebody who grows hops on the North Fork. But this time we have three winemakers. So we're going to encourage them to talk amongst themselves and answer the questions together. But first I'd like them all to introduce themselves and tell us briefly how they came to become winemakers on the North Fork. So ladies first, Marin, we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, I'm going to give a little background about where I work at Bedell Cellars. We've been a family winery since 1980, creating premium wines on an estate vineyard. We have 80 acres. And I started in 2010 in the tasting room while I was finishing up my bachelor's degree at Johnson & Wales University. My first harvest was in 2011 with winemaker Richard Olson Harbeck, and I worked my way up with the company and became assistant winemaker in 2016. And Quarry Creek taproom wines, we have created a small batch series in 2019, and I completed my enology certificate in 2019 as well from Washington State University. So I had a very busy harvest that year.
Excellent. And then Juan?
Yes. Hey, Juan Micieli-Martinez here. So yeah, I graduated from the State University of New York, Binghamton in 1999. My senior year, actually my junior year, housemate who was a senior, a year older, developed an interest in wine, started tasting some wines with him, noticing differences in flavors. Growing up here on Long Island, I knew that there were vineyards on the East End. So my idea was to actually get my last summer job learning about wine. So before graduation, I kind of took a trip around the East End, stopped in at Palmer Vineyards, where the only job that they had was driving a tractor. And I was like, I'm graduating from college, like, I don't want to drive a tractor. And so then I hopped around, and the woman that was working there told me to go over to Pellegrini Vineyards and talk with John Leo. And John was managing the tasting room at Pellegrini at the time. And my first job was working at Pellegrini Vineyards in the tasting room alongside with John. But before long, I managed to find my way into the cellar. And one morning, 1999, I'm out in the vineyard grabbing samples. And I was just standing out in the vineyard, and I was like, I think I could do this, for a living. I enjoy this. And so I often joke around that I'm still working that last summer job, but been through a lot of different, kind of worked at a number of different places, on the North Fork. And actually, in addition to being kind of co-owner and winemaker for Montauk Daisy Wines, I also work at Premium Wine Group, where I still work with John Leo. So it's John and I have been working, together through the years for over 20 years now. So yeah, and it's been a great journey. Met lots of wonderful people, and really happy to be here tonight. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, John.
Yes, hi everyone. Nice to see you or meet you all. And Juan, yeah, it has been over 20 years, and it's been fun. I'd say almost all of it, except for certain bottling days, perhaps. I got interested in wine. I graduated with a journalism degree from Syracuse University a way long time ago, and caught an interest in wine from my grandfather, an Italian immigrant who made wine in the basement, as the cliche goes. But so always had an interest in wine, and then visited different wine regions around the world, and finally decided that I did want to get into the business and become a part of the industry. I worked in the Napa Valley for a year back in the 80s. And then, because I'm from the Hudson Valley originally in New York, I settled on the East Coast and started working at a winery in the Hudson Valley for a few years, and then found my way down to the South Fork. Actually, I started working at Sag Pond Vineyards, which is what used to be known, what the old name for Wolfer Estate, the original name for Wolfer Estate. So I worked there in the vineyard and learned vineyard management and so forth as best I could in the years I was there. And then from there moved to Pellegrini Vineyards, and from Pellegrini Vineyards moved to Premium Wine Group when that opened over 20 years ago. I started making my own wine called Leo Family Red. Back in 1999 is the first year I started the project, but I didn't bottle anything with a label on it until 2007. And in that time, I also became the consulting winemaker for Clovis Point and for OnaBay Vineyards as well. I'm still very interested in the vineyard part of the work as much as I am in the winemaking end of the business. And the whole science and agriculture and sales conglomeration of wine is fascinating to me, and has been for years. And I continue to find joy in it.
Thank you, John. So I'm asking kind of a naive question for everybody listening. What grapes grow well on Long Island? And what did we begin with in the 70s when I believe the Hargraves were the first to grow grapes and make wine? And have the varieties and hybrids changed or adapted? Or, you know, I'm assuming winemakers and growers have learned a great deal since the 70s. So what grapes did we start with? And, you know, what direction are we going now? And Marin, we could start with you because you're interested in different kinds of grapes.
Sure. So we started on Long Island mostly with Chardonnay and Merlot being the main two varietals on Long Island. Those are still our biggest or most widely planted varieties, but it's become so much more diverse than that over the years. We have Malbec planted now, Albarino, newly planted varieties that are coming in at Quarry Creek are Malone de Bourgogne. Our first vintage was 2020, so that will be released in the coming months. And we also have Auxerrois and Verdejo, which are also white varietals. Auxerrois is grown in Alsace and Germany region, and Verdejo is in the Rueda region in Spain. So they're first on the Long Island, to be grown on Long Island. So I'm looking forward to having them come in and turning them into wine in 2021.
And Juan, John, anything to add to, you know, how maybe grape varieties have changed, or maybe the popularity of certain wines, like rosé wasn't a thing 20 years ago, was it?
John, I don't know if you want, I'll let you take that one, or
Go ahead, Juan.
what's that? Oh,
Okay, well, yeah, I would like to say, actually, Marin, before even Merlot, the Hargraves planted a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir with the Chardonnay. Those were the popular grapes in California at the time, and that's what, you know, young vineyard owners here decided, well, if it can work there, it can work here. So we kind of got to Merlot after realizing that Cabernet Sauvignon was having a hard time getting ripe in this area, and Merlot started getting, you know, more and more popular at that point. But I would like to also add that there's different kind of subtypes of each variety. And so the original plantings, a lot of it was coming from nurseries in California, and they were geared towards California climate and soils, and they didn't do as well here as they could have. And one thing we've learned over the years is that if we get the right subtypes of Merlot and Chardonnay and Malbec and Cabernet Sauvignon, we have much more success. We get much riper flavors and much more interesting wines planting the right subtype. We call them clones in the industry, but I think that's a little bit confusing. But if you think of, you know, a tomato, there's lots of different kinds of tomatoes. Well, Merlot, there's several different kinds of Merlots, and they ripen a little differently and provide different flavor profiles and so forth. So I think that's been a big part of our learning curve and progress. Please, Juan.
yeah, no, I'd agree. You know, I think Merlot and Chardonnay, you know, through the years have, as Marin mentioned earlier, are the more widely planted varieties, and still are. You know, there's always been this Cab Franc, you know, being the main red, or, you know, there's always been these other talks of other varietals. But when you look at what is planted, Merlot and Chardonnay are what everybody goes back to. Historically, at least here on Long Island, from you know, what I've seen is you know, Chardonnay has maintained. And there was actually a funny story about Chardonnay in the early days here on Long Island. There was what people, again, the early days, like John said, people were just calling up for California to send things over, and they would just kind of send whatever they had, you know, irregardless of the type of clone, as John had mentioned. So you know, there were a number of vineyards here that had what they thought to be Chardonnay that was different than the other Chardonnays, different clones, because it ripened at a different time. And I wasn't around in the industry at the time, but they brought what somebody who identifies what wine grapes are called, or ampelography, an ampelographer, to the island here, and started looking through the vineyards at these weird clones of Chardonnay. And it turned out that it wasn't Chardonnay at all. It was Pinot Blanc. And so it was one of the early stories where people were misidentifying even varieties. But, you know, everybody will always go back to Merlot and Chardonnay, but Merlot has kind of changed through the years as well too, in that what it's made into. In the early days, I think everybody was trying to make red wines with it, where now the fashion has changed, and we see a lot of Merlot transitioning now into rosé, and still made into red wine, but you see a lot of it going in that direction. And now you see all varietals kind of even going in that direction as the popularity of rosé has increased.
Do you all feel that, or I guess the way I should word it is, how has, if it has, climate change affected growing grapes? Have you felt any impact from temperature change or even water temperature change, terroir?
Yeah, I guess I'll start off on this one. So I was part of an organization called the Long Island Merlot Alliance, and one of the things that we were starting to look at was, you know, where, you know, on the North Fork or South Fork, when does Merlot, was it getting picked? When was it getting to optimal ripeness? You know, and so you see the differences, you know, within the different areas within the locality of the North and South Fork. But when you take a bigger step back and you really start to look at the data through all of the years, you know, I mean, when I first got into the wine business, I remember, you know, Cabernet Sauvignon, you know, would come in November 12th, 14th, you know, whatever it was, and it would even be snowing. Where now, like, you see like Cabernet Sauvignon coming in at times where I've picked coming in late October. So you actually can see a shift occurring, or has occurred, upon when things are being picked. So things are getting picked earlier and then riper than where they have been before in the past. And all wineries collect this data. We're all sitting on this data, where if you wanted to really kind of give some proof to climate change, the wine industry would be a great vehicle for doing that, because you can see how the weather, the climate has affected our ripening of fruit.
That's interesting. Anybody have anything to add to that? You share the same experience?
Yeah, could I add that I definitely agree that things have been warmer and noticeably warmer, so we're getting riper earlier. Since 2010 or so, we've had a lot of really good vintages. So in a sense, the warming trend has helped us quite a lot. We've always were considered a bit of a fringe area where we were still cool climate, and we are cool climate, but we have a little bit more generosity from the weather now, where we're getting ripeness earlier because of that. But what happens is we also get some untimely rains, both in the spring and in the fall. The summertime rains don't seem to do much damage or cause many problems, even if we get a big storm. But especially in September and early October, when the grapes are getting ripe and the skins are soft, a heavy rain and kind of warm nights and sort of humid, warm days really causes disease to spread. So as much as the warmer temperatures have been good in the general season, we are more concerned, at least I'm more concerned, with when those rains come and when the warmth finally gives up and goes away, because we want cooler nights for ripening. So if we are seeing Septembers that are getting warmer and warmer, I'm going to be worried about that. I'm hoping that there's some sort of moderating influence from the oceans this far out, you know, on Long Island, that is going to help us out on that score.
Marin, and you're the only person who can answer this question. What is it like being a woman working in a pretty much male-dominated business of winemaking and growing grapes?
When I first started, I was the only female in our cellar. And since then, I've worked 2 vintages here where we've had all female crews working in the cellar here. as well as our vineyard manager being female and the assistant to the vineyard manager being a woman as well. So it's definitely become a more diversified industry since I've started, even just a decade ago. And I've had a lot of support from my winemaker, Rich Olson Harbeck, who's shown me the ropes and, you know, inspired me to be a winemaker, along with founding winemaker Kip Bedell. He's been an instrumental mentor to me over the years, and having those two male figures help me through and navigate becoming a winemaker has really helped me along the way. But ultimately, the goal is to be known just as a winemaker, not as a female winemaker.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. John, you touched on the fact that you experienced wine as a young child, going to your grandparents for Sunday dinners. I understand that you would drink the wine mixed with cream soda. Has your taste
delicious.
improved? Has your wine taste improved since then?
I'm
In other
hoping
words,
it has.
what is your favorite wine now?
Yeah, so I like all sorts of wine, and I try not to just drink my own wines. I buy wines from all over the world to try to keep an open mind and an open palate as to, you know, what is good and what I can do better. But I definitely stopped the cream soda a little while ago. Although, ironically, now what's one of the more popular things in the wine shops is coolers, you know, in cans with it, wine and seltzer and sugar and so forth. So I guess the general public is still in that same frame of reference that I had as a kid. But, you know, red blends, I really enjoy Bordeaux red blends, and the Leo family red that I make is sort of modeled after that, where I think bringing components of different flavors from different varieties together can make something that's even more interesting. And so I guess as much as I enjoy Merlot and Cabernet Franc locally, and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc locally, my heart's still with making the best possible red blends that I can make from those varieties, you know, coming together.
Mm-hmm. Juan, I have a question. I'm going to read your quote again. You once said that winemakers can make the best wine, but if tasting room staff don't know how to translate what we do into marketable language, it gets lost. And I also understand that your wife, with whom you make wine, is also a certified sommelier. So is that why you married her?
No. Yeah, no, it's certainly important that the people that are on the front lines, you know, understand what they're selling. I mean, it's kind of, if you go in to buy a car and you talk to somebody about the car and they can't tell you anything about it and they don't know much, you kind of, you know, you don't have the same experience that if somebody that is understanding about what they're trying to sell. It's easier to get excited about something when somebody is able to explain it to you properly. You know, but Bridget and I, we do talk a lot about wine, you know, so it is certainly one of the things that I do love about her is that we share this interest in wine, and she's great because she helps keep me grounded as well too. At times it's like when I bring something, or through the years I brought, what do you think of this? You know, and we'll taste and we'll talk about it. And, you know, I've even made decisions based on discussions that we've had. But yeah, I think it's always critical that whoever you have kind of, and when I worked at other wineries, I spent a lot of time training staff and tasting with them and talking about the wines, because I want them to be able to have that comfort level to share it with other people as well.
Yeah, it sounds like when a chef teaches the waiters and waitresses and they get to taste everything, they're better equipped to tell the guests in the restaurant about it. That makes sense. So this question is for everybody. It's kind of a broad question, and, you know, not necessarily the impact of COVID over the last year and a half, but what is the market like today for winemakers and just the industry right now? Marin,
So,
would you like to start
yeah.
again, or John?
Please,
Uh,
Marin, go ahead.
Sure. As from our winery, we've been doing very well selling wine. A lot of people enjoy drinking wine during this pandemic. So we've been
Indeed.
continuing to work. Online sales have really done well, and even the tasting room, when we had outside seating during the summer, everyone was socially distanced, and people came to taste wine and enjoy even during these different times of social distancing. And I've been still very busy in the winery producing an array of different wines to be sold. I have a bottling season right now, been bottling nonstop to get ready for the summer season.
Excellent. John and Juan?
Yeah, if I can add a little historical perspective, there seemed to have been a couple of waves of investment coming into the industry. When I started in the mid 90s out here, and that was sort of that was maybe the second wave where some folks with money came in and bought up some properties and planted vineyards, and we got some new names in the field. Some of them are still with us. Some of them have sold off again. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, I'd say there was another wave. But in the mid 2000s, the folks I worked with, we were kind of worried. We kind of felt like there might not be a future for the wine industry out here because there wasn't a lot of growth going on, and people were complaining that the wines were too expensive and they could buy other things elsewhere. We weren't getting as much traffic coming out east as we hoped we would. There was just this sense that if the older owners passed away and didn't have anyone to inherit their vineyards, what was going to happen to them? Were they going to be developed? Were they just going to be sold off as developable land? And so it turned around about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, maybe, with, again, some more investment. And when the Great Recession hit, instead of losing customers to come out, we actually gained a lot of people coming to the tasting room. Maybe folks that normally would have traveled to Europe or traveled elsewhere, but they decided to stay more local. So we had a lot of new people, Long Islanders, discovering the industry about 10 or 12 years ago, and that helped a lot. And I really feel like now I'm pretty bullish. I think we have a really good future. Not that we're going to grow a lot in size because farmland, agricultural land is so limited right now, but the wineries that are here seem to be doing well and seem to be profitable more often than not. So I think that's a positive sign.
That's good to hear. Juan, do you have anything to add to that? Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, I'd agree with what's already been mentioned. Yeah, no, I would.
Then my question is, I think we touched on this in our pre-meeting Zoom. Do you think that the legalization of marijuana that's going on now, what could it possibly mean for the grape growing and winemaking industry on Long Island? Would it become a commodity crop, as John Leo, you were describing potatoes and what used to be considered commodity crops? Do you think the growing of marijuana could impact the wine industry?
I think if you look at California, which is a large industry that has both, I think there's going to be some really wacky wines being made if the crossover between the two is permitted. But I think we're going to have to.
Do they do that in California?
I've heard about it. I mean, they cross everything else over, candy and all sorts of other things. I have seen that they have, like, wines that I guess where the two have been crossed. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it impacts. I also consult at a winery in Massachusetts, and actually in the West Hampton, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Northampton, Massachusetts, for anybody that's aware. But actually, the year that I started consulting there was the year that Massachusetts legalized and the first dispensary opened up in Northampton. So I've been able to go up there for the past couple of years and talk to the owners there and actually ask questions of how this has impacted them. And you hear everything on both sides, but from my experiences of going up there and talking with them and what they experience, it hasn't had a huge, it hasn't negatively impacted their sales at the winery, which I think is hopefully will be something similar that we will see, but I think we're going to have to wait and see how it all unfolds in the end.
Marin, do you have an opinion or input on that?
I'll be in the industry for quite some time, so I'll see how it works out.
So we have quite some time. I wouldn't think that as far as land, real estate, that marijuana would need to take up a lot of room compared to growing grapes. So hopefully it wouldn't be too difficult. What would your advice be, again, for everybody, for somebody new in the business, somebody who wants to go into the wine business on the east end of Long Island? A brand new person wants, and I don't mean the investors, because that's kind of the easy part, but for a young person or someone switching careers who says, I want to grow grapes and I want to be a winemaker, what would your advice be, all three of you?
Perseverance. Yeah. I'd like to, I think there's still room for people that are interested, but you have to put the hours in. You have to show that you're really interested, and just do the work. It's not a matter of, winemaking being a glamorous profession. It's mostly, dragging hoses and cleaning tanks and a lot of physical work on your feet all day. So it's great work, and there's some really good enjoyment at the end of it when you make some good wines. But if you want to get into the wine business, be ready to work and work hard, and be ready to listen and learn on the job.
It's a good answer.
Actually, I should say, I'm sorry, I've spoken like a journalist, because obviously I don't have an enology degree. I never studied winemaking. And so that's how I kind of got into the business, was sideways by just, volunteering to work hard. And so that's definitely a biased answer based on my circumstances.
But the answer, perseverance, could work for just about any line of work that you want to succeed in. And I mean, I think. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I've kind of helped a couple of people through the years, try and get navigated into the wine industry. One of them, I was a panelist, I believe, on one of the discussions, Alyssa Goodale. She had worked with me at Martha Clara Vineyards. She had expressed an interest to me, and I said, look, you really want to get into the wine business? Go work on the bottling line. And I said, when you work on the bottling line, you're going to get to know the people that are working there. And I said, if they see that you're a hard worker, that's going to open up doors for you to get into other places. So, to me, if anybody, and as well as myself, someone who started, kind of in a tasting room and kind of worked my way, through, the entire scale. I've been a general manager. Now I'm kind of a co-owner with my wife of a brand. As John had said, it's perseverance, it's hard work, it's definitely not, it's not for the person that's light, like can't take a real heavy strenuous day. During harvest, those days, I mean, I have worked a 23-hour shift in harvest. You know, I've seen I was there when the sun was coming up, I watched it go down, and I watched it come back up again. I haven't done a lot of those, but you know, you're dealing with agriculture, and there isn't a set beginning and end, you know, with especially during harvest.
Wow. Now, Marin, I just thought of this, something you said once when Juan mentioned working on the bottling line. You said once that right before a wine is bottled is my favorite because I like to look back at my notes and see when we picked the grapes and the journey it took to get to that point.
Yes, bottling is an aggravating time because everything that can go wrong does go wrong on the bottling line, but it's also my favorite because of the perfection that you put into making the bottle look nice for the consumer, and all of the hard work that goes into what's in the bottle goes onto the bottling line and then gets packed up and goes to the consumer. So yeah, that's probably my favorite. As far as getting into the wine industry, it's taking the initiative, I think. It's asking the questions, being inquisitive, being there, taking the time, putting in the hard work. But also, it's expensive to grow grapes. It's an expensive industry to be in as a grape grower. So to plant these new and different varietals that I was talking about previously, you don't want to sink that money into a variety that doesn't grow well here. So one of the most valuable resources we have on Long Island is the Cornell Cooperative Extension in Riverhead with Alice Wise, who is the viticulturalist and grape specialist. Over the years, she's planted these varieties and different varieties from year to year, as well as other research on vines that do well. And that's how we know that Malbec was a good variety for us, and Albarino, and these new different varietals for the future.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'm going to throw out some terms that are defined differently, but I would like to hear you all's definitions of certain words like, or in practices, biodynamic, organic, traditional, and sustainable. I know they all mean different things. Well, maybe I should say, how would you describe your practices? Juan, I know there's probably only one biodynamic winery on the North Fork. Is that right? Is there a biodynamic winery on the North Fork?
I mean, I had spent a short amount of time working at Shin Estate Vineyards before they recently changed over to Rose Hill Vineyard, which actually I'm drinking their rosé right now.
Oh.
But Shin, well, when I was there, we were talking about biodynamics. There were definitely some practices occurring, but I don't want to offend anybody that's into biodynamics, but I feel like it's a little bit more. I come with a science background, so I'm very scientific with my approach to things. So you have to be able to demonstrate something, you know, scientifically, scientific method, see it, repeat it. Biodynamics is a lot of, to me personally, it's a little bit religious. Like it's a blind faith with things. Sustainability to me is more encompassing because it really is a broader picture, not only in the vineyard, but it's also how you kind of treat labor and how you again, and in producing wines, you know, something I think the wine industry could become more sustainable. I think putting more wines into keg, and maybe like the breweries are doing things with refillable bottles, growlers. I mean, I'd love to see the wine industry, you know, packaging waste is a reality of the wine industry. I mean, each bottle is a single use bottle. I mean, if you think about glass, it's definitely reusable. So it would reduce, the amount of waste if we reuse things more. So I'm all for sustainability and even small things. We bottled our red wine with a cork, and we're not going to put a capsule on the bottle. It's a small, minuscule thing, but those capsules are just future garbage. So I really think as an industry, we could do better than what we're doing now. But as far as natural, I think there was another traditional, maybe I'll let somebody else kind of take some of those other terms, but just my take on biodynamics and sustainability.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, so traditional agriculture used to be organic, right? Before the introduction of synthetic chemicals, all agriculture was organic. So nothing wrong with that. Synthetic chemicals brought some advantages to a lot of the world. It helped feed a lot of the world. So we shouldn't be too harsh on the idea that modern science destroyed, organic agriculture. It actually improved it in a lot of ways. But returning to organic, or at least sustainable, which is 98% organic pretty much, is a wonderful thing. It means we're paying attention to our land and paying attention to our environment, and we want it to continue providing for future generations. So, organic has rules and regulations. If you're 98% organic, like I heard some vineyard manager tell me 10 years ago, that means you're not organic, right? I mean, you have to be 100% to be following the rules. But
Not
sustainable
easy,
means, yeah, it's not easy. And sustainable means you're making every effort, and you might be 98% organic. And every once in a while, you need to control a fungus outbreak or something with a chemical that was manufactured for that purpose. So in general, I like Juan's idea that sustainable isn't just, what you do in the vineyard. It's how you handle everything about growing grapes, making wine, and selling wine.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Marin? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, so please go ahead, Marin.
At Bedell and Quarry Creek, we're part of Long Island Sustainable Wine Growers, which was established in 2012. So we are a sustainable winery. We were one of the first companies to be part of this organization. There's now over 20 wineries on Long Island that are part of this. There's actually a little seal that you can find on wineries that are part of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a science-based philosophy using knowledge over the decades from traditional organic and biodynamic, taking those best practices and using those that are best suited for our region, as well as we aren't using capsules on the Quarry Creek wines, and some of it we do portion out.
What are capsules?
It's a foil piece that goes on top of.
Okay.
So we just put the cork on and no capsule.
Mm-hmm.
And then we reserve a portion of our wine to being on keg and on a tap system.
I think that's a really good idea, especially for the fresher wines. And
Yeah.
filling growlers, you fill growlers for people?
We can fill growlers. We do have a portion of the wine in bottle to take home, but you could fill up a bottle to take with you as well if you don't want to hold on to it for as long. If you want to drink it right away, we could put it in a growler for you.
So I think we should open up for questions. I just have one last question. I know that a lot of farmers hang out together when they're all done working, and fishermen hang out together, and chefs hang out together. So I'm wondering, do winemakers hang out together when they're done working? Is there a community?
I would say there is a community, but not as much hanging out, at least in my generation. Hopefully the younger generation, there is more. But mainly because of long days and commutes home and so forth, we don't do as much of it as I'd like to do. We have had winemaker dinners that were ongoing for years and years and seem to have petered out, unless I'm not being invited anymore. Maybe they're still going strong and no one calls me. That's a possibility. I hope so, actually.
They're holding out for the Leo family wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's enough. I mean, obviously with COVID and everything, you know, that has become more challenging to do. But when I was younger, you know, again, you get married, you have a child, you know, it's now you can more readily find me out on a sideline of a field someplace, whether it be a baseball or a soccer field. But yeah, I just don't have as much time as I'd like to be able to do those types of things.
Right, right. Marin, same thing for you? Do you feel that way?
Yes, pre-COVID, I was a part of a tasting group with some local winemakers, but since then it's been kind of hard to be a part of that. But our schedules are pretty hectic between harvest and then also putting all of it in bottle. Sometimes we just don't get the time to end up all coming together.
Right, right.
My fiance is in the wine industry too, so I'm around it all the time.
Yeah, so I guess people who have something in common are drawn to each other in the business. Like that happens sometimes. And it helps because they understand your hours and all of that. Kathy, would you like to open us up to questions?
Sure, sure. So there's been several questions in the Q&A and in the chat. So if anybody wants to put in a question, you can use either format. I'm going to just look through some of them.
I'm looking to,
Billy,
I only see 3.
yeah, so Billy has asked, has orange wine, skin contact white wine, not the fruit orange, been growing in popularity as a wine variety?
I don't think so. I think it might have peaked a couple of years ago. There was a lot of experimentation out east, and I haven't seen as much put into the bottle in the last couple of years as there were before.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for maybe not everybody that's familiar with it, you know, it's orange wines are pretty much traditional back to that. I mean, white wines, you know, a couple hundred years ago, you know, they didn't have modern day techniques that we have. So much like a red wine, they would have been fermented on the skins. White grapes fermented, you know, with the skins. Nowadays, we squeeze the grapes, the juice comes out, and we ferment only the juice. Pretty much. I mean, there's still some skin contact things that occur, but when there's certain varietals, Pinot Grigio, Gewürztraminer, they are pigmented varietals, white grapes that have pigments in the skins. So when you ferment on those skins, those pigments come out into the wine, and over time, they kind of manifest themselves as orange pigmentation. So that's where the name orange wine comes from. It's not that you're fermenting oranges at all. But in Massachusetts, where I consult there, we've been playing around with that as well. I've done some work with it. I agree with John here. It hasn't been too popular. Up in Massachusetts, I definitely see a strong interest in orange wines there.
Good. Anything from Marin? Do you want to add anything, or shall I continue?
We do skin contact on some of our white wines, but it's typically only overnight, and then we'll press. So it's not that extended maceration where you would see that with an orange wine.
Okay, great. Thank you. Eileen has a question about Cab Franc. She's asked, can you comment on Cab Franc and Pinot Noir on the North Fork? I think that was relevant to one of the comments we were talking about earlier.
Grape varieties?
Yeah, can I start? I think Cabernet Franc can be really, really delicious growing on the North Fork. Again, there's these different subtypes, and the original plantings of Cabernet Franc that came from California never tended to get that ripe. But now we have in the ground on a lot of the vineyards better clonal material, better material that offers a lot more flavor And I think some of the Cab Francs can be really, really pretty. They are more fruit forward than Merlot and less tannic. So in some cases, that's a positive that people like. And then Pinot Noir is still being experimented with, and there's some quite good ones being made. But I think most vineyards are hesitant to plant Pinot Noir because it's very difficult to grow and ripen consistently.
I have a question from somebody. Beth wants to know, are there wineries that someone can volunteer at? Maybe perhaps to get started.
Marin?
We don't have volunteers, but we do hire harvest interns.
John, have you ever
Get
had
that
anybody
person's
do-
name.
Yeah.
Yes, so the harvest intern is really the place where it is a paid position. It helps if you have some sort of experience, although, you know, at Premium Wine Group, we hire people sometimes without any experience, but strong desires and interest. But it's a paid position that's usually temporary. It's, you know, for a few months. The problem with volunteers is that, you know, it takes a while to train people to work in the vineyard or work in the winery. And if you're on their schedule and they're not on your schedule, it's, you know, very time consuming and very costly actually to the winery. So go for an internship. It's a better idea.
I have a question from Carla. She says, my daughter began with Agree Tina, is that correct? And is now in California as an owner with her husband of 2 wine businesses. But one can start with other skills that can be useful as a winery. I guess it's more of a statement. One can start with other skills that can be useful, is what she said.
You're getting more questions than I am. Oh, there it is.
I'm looking at the chat as well as in the Q&A.
Oh,
so,
okay. I'm just
yeah.
looking at the questions.
She just commented.
Okay.
She said, "Christina, Christina." That was a throwback to the old school days on the North Fork.
Oh.
John.
Excuse me, I was there back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Now Macari Vineyards was formerly Galluccio before Macari took it over.
Yeah, there's been some changes in turnover in the industry in general in terms of ownership, but consistently good. There's another question. So when we were talking about the sustainability and talking about the capsules, Beth wants to know, aren't the capsules that are metal recyclable? Can they be recycled?
So capsules kind of come typically, it's Saranex. I'm sorry, not Saranex. It's tin. I'm drawing a blank. PVC.
Polylam
And
or PVC.
Polylam. Yeah. So tin is metal. Very few wineries use tin nowadays. It is very expensive. You see it occasionally, but most of them are using PVC and Polylam, which are both plastics.
So let's see.
Someone was asking about sulfites or sulfates.
Yes, Shelley wants to know is if we can talk about sulfates and Long Island wines, you know, and whether or not that's an issue for our area.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. What was the question again, Kathy?
Just asking us if we can talk about sulfates and Long Island wines in general.
I mean, from experience, and Marin and John can always add into this. I mean, our sulfate levels are similar to any region, that I've taught. Again, working in a winery, a lot of times you've worked abroad. I have worked in Australia. I've visited wineries all over the world. I've heard it many times, like, oh, Italian wineries, Italian wines, they don't use sulfites, and it's like. When I've talked with Italian winemakers and I'll ask them those questions and like, no, we absolutely use sulfites. It's a preservative. It is highly effective. And you, again, typically, it's not always, but lesser priced wines tend to have higher levels of sulfites, you know, because the fruit is handled differently than more premium wine grapes would be handled. Sweet wines typically tend to have higher levels of sulfites as well too, but we're not adding anything any more than any other wine region in the world, unless the wine was designated as organic. But even then, sulfites are a natural byproduct of fermentation. So you could really not eliminate. There are now some new yeast strains that I've read about that have produced lower levels of sulfites, but they're still just a natural byproduct of even fermentation.
That's what a lot of people don't understand. They think it's always something that's added to wines, and they say, oh, I can't drink red or I can't drink white. The sulfites give me a headache, but it is something naturally occurring.
And they are added. They are added. You know, we'll say that. You know,
right.
Yeah. Jeffrey has a question. Is there a difference between cloning and genetically modified?
If he's referring to my use of the word clone, that's why I was hesitant to use it, because it is confusing. It's very, very different. There's no genetically modified grapevines on Long Island. It's still under discussion in California whether the research vineyards should even go in that direction or not, because there's so much resistance to it. And I don't see any reason to use genetically modified grapevines anytime in the near future. But when I talked about clones, those are naturally occurring differences within a variety. So for example, let's take Merlot. In France, where Merlot is a predominant grape, the research vineyards will take cuttings from different vineyards, different famous vineyards all over France, and they'll raise those cuttings into vines and test the fruit from them and see differences. You know, how early the fruit ripens, how late it ripens, how big the clusters are, how many clusters per vine, etc. So all these differences are then noted, and those different types are then given names. So we talk about clone 1 and clone 3 and clone 121 or whatever. It's basically a naturally occurring variation within the variety, within the Merlot variety, for example. So very different than genetic modification.
Good, thank you, John. Lorraine wants to know, how do you replenish the soil, and do you rotate different grape varietals? That's a good question.
Yes. So the vines are perennials, just like fruit trees. So once you plant, usually you're staying with that variety for a long time, and those plants for a long time, hopefully, unless you have to pull things out for disease reasons or whatever. We have cover crops between the rows of vines, and I think most of the growers out east use a perennial cover crop as well. So we have basically a grass and clover kind of cover between the rows of vines, but the vines themselves are perennials, and they'll stay there for. So far, I think the oldest vines out here are about 40, 45 years old. The original Hargrave plantings, most of that has been replanted, but there are still some vines over 40 years old out here.
Mm-hmm.
We've replanted some of our older vines, which were 30 to 35 years old, to newer varietals. So we've ripped out a block that was Merlot and replanted with a different variety like Malbec. And also we take our grape pumice that is a byproduct of pressing the skins, and we turn that into compost and put that back into our vineyards.
Pruning wood as well too. Most vineyards now will bring it into the center of a row, and then you have what we call a brush chopper that just kind of comes and chops it up into smaller pieces, so that can return to the soil as well.
Can I ask a quick dumb question in between the audience asking questions? I know in California they use the cut vines in barbecues and for flavoring, and they sell it. Do we do that? I've never seen it for sale out here, and I understand it smokes a great deal. So have any of you ever tried cooking over grapevines? Is that a thing out here at all, like it is in California?
Juan, did you have any experience with that at Shin?
We not at Shin, but at Martha Clara, we did at one point in time sell bundles of like the trunks and things like that to people. So we did do that, but at Shin we did not. Yeah, I don't recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right? I think I
One of the-
want to go steal some grapevines.
What's really great is using kind of the barrel wood. Like sometimes, instead we'll put red wines into barrel. Well, you can also sometimes we'll put staves of wood into wine. So you'll have a stainless steel tank where you're putting the wood into the tank, and then after it spends some contact time with it, you pull it out. And I've taken that home and I'll use that on my smoker, and it's like thumbs up. Yes.
That sounds good.
And we would
Wow.
do that at Martha Clara as well too when I was there, but I'm not certain what everybody is doing now.
That sounds good, actually. Yeah.
Right?
There was a follow-up question on the recyclable issue. Patrice wants to know, what about the box format for higher priced wines? It seems like they could be more sustainable if they were, put into a box. What do you think about that?
The bag in the box, you think she's referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, the bag is a plastic bag that's not going to get recycled. I don't think, because it's got wine residue inside that you're not going to be able to rinse out very easily. So that part of it's not very sustainable. The box itself, yeah, they're usually laminated, which is less attractive to recyclers, but certainly possible. To me, the biggest issue I think with the bag in a box is, are you going to put your best wines into a plastic bag and try to sell them for a premium price? I think there's a lot of resistance to that. So I think the bag in the box has become a format for everyday, easy drinking, inexpensive wines. So the image issue is going to be part of the problem there.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually.
Mhm.
There's another question, an interesting question that may or may not be able to be answered by this group, but Jeffrey wants to know, is anyone growing olives for oil? Is there any kind of interest? Have you heard of anybody doing that on the East End, or if this is even appropriate for our climate?
So I don't know if you guys have any information. I know a few smaller winery owners did try, and our climate isn't suitable yet. Give us another little bit of global warming and possibly it will.
Hey, that's the silver lining.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
right.
thinking too. I feel like it's not really quite there yet. So that's an interesting question. That pretty much covers the questions that we had from the group. So does anybody want to make a last statement before we close today? If
All
not,
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'd just like to say to all the folks that tuned in here, thank you very much. Thanks for your interest, and thank you for supporting East End Wines. We appreciate it.
Thank you, John. And I do want to thank everyone that's been on the panel today who's joined us and spent some time together. Marin, Juan, and John, and of course, Laura, our moderator. We really appreciate the time you've given to help share some stories and some interesting facts about growing and making wine. It's something so many people are really interested in. So
You guys were great. Thank you so much.
yeah. Just so you know, we are recording this. And so if you're interested in sharing the information with a friend, the recording will be found on the Land Trust's website blog. So you can just go to the blog and take a look. And while you're there, we have a lot of other programs that we've been offering the last year or so, virtual programs that are also found on the blog. So check those out as well. All the Zoom programs we've offered are there, as well as a bunch of videos that we've offered monthly. So thanks again. Thanks for tuning in. And I really appreciate that you're all here. And thank you for being a part of this. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Take care.
Night.
Thanks, Kathy.
Bye-bye. See you around the neighborhood, John.
Okay,
Hey,
see you
Kathy.
around.
Kathy,
Yes.
a lot of people are saying they don't know where to find North Fork wines.
Oh,
was one of the
my.
that was one of the last questions or comments.
Oh, I missed that. So on the South Fork, so Carla is asking about this. I didn't realize. I actually find North Fork wines at most local wine cellars on the South Fork. I'm not sure where Carla is calling in from, but most local wine stores do have an array. And if you just ask your wine
Cavagnola's.
cellar, yep.
Cavagnola's definitely, Domaine Franey, probably Michael Sinque and Amagansett.
Yes. West Hampton does, Hampton Bays does. I've seen them certainly in Riverhead. Most wine cellars actually have an area of their store that is dedicated to local wine.
There we go. John Leo already posted that Park Place, they're really good too, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a
And many
lot of
more.
places.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carla.
I want
for
to try
asking.
Montauk Daisy. Can I drive over to the North Fork and get some Montauk Daisy?
If you order montaukdaisy.com,
Mhm.
we can deliver to you. We're actually doing a special. It's if you use the promo code Daisy30, you get 30% off as well. So
And Marin, you're doing your own special bottlings. That would be fun to try some of those. Are you at a taste? You have a tasting room there, right?
We do have a tasting room and we do have an online shop as well for both Bedell and Quarry Creek.
Bedell is really good. All of your wineries are excellent.
Thank
I'm
you.
always bugging restaurants. I'm always asking restaurants, what local wines they have on their wine list. And most of them are very, very supportive. They're really good ones.
Yes.
Agreed.
I agree.
Good.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, everybody.
Take care.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.